If I told you that you could make £15,000 from just one property without even doing a refurb, would you believe me? Well, I hope so, because this story is exactly how I've done that. Roll the clocks back to March 2022. I was going all out, all guns blazing, trying to increase and build my property portfolio. As some of you are probably aware as investors, this year has been quite difficult for finding properties because of the demand in the market. The demand has outstripped the supply of property. So I was doing lots of viewings, lots of offers, but I was also doing lots of marketing, lots of campaigns in order to try and meet owners, try and get direct to vendor contacts, hopefully purchase properties off of them for a slightly better price because they've not had to pay for estate agencies. Now, it was at this time that I did make communication with a direct to vendor lead. I spoke to the owner about his property. It had just become empty as a tenant has left, and we mutually agreed upon a price that suited him and suited me. Now, my initial intention was to purchase this property and apply the buy, refurbish, refinance strategy, which for those of you that don't know is try and buy it for a good price, add value to this property through a refurbishment, bring it up to a good specification so that we can then rent it out, get a good and hopefully high market rent, but also refinance this property and try and refinance this at the highest price that we can in the market to then take out some of our money from this property to put forward to the next property. So I was going to use what's called as the BRR strategy in order to purchase and keep this property in my portfolio, but also recycle the money forward. It was also, however, at this time that I also had another direct to vendor lead come through that I wanted to explore and purchase myself. This was for a slightly more expensive, slightly more extravagant property deal that I wanted to explore. And therefore I was left with a predicament. Do I purchase the first property that I mentioned? Do I purchase this new one that's just become available? Or do I try to purchase them both? Whilst I work with investors a lot, whilst I have a fair amount of capital myself from running my sourcing and education business, I wanted to make sure that I kept my money moving, and I didn't quite have enough to cover the cost of both or cover the cost of keeping both, but I didn't want to let either opportunity slip away. So it was at this point during the process of buying property number one that I mentioned that I decided to keep it, however decided to change strategy. I decided that I would flip this house and sell it on. Now, you might think the story ended there, but it didn't quite. There was a further decision to make, and that is how to flip this property. You see, I'm purchasing this property for a good price, which I will come on to talk about, but then I have two options in front of me. It was either to purchase this property, do the refurbishment, and sell this property for a profit. I would probably achieve around £120,000. Or do I purchase this property, not go ahead with the intended refurbishment, but then sell this but for £90,000. Now, you might wonder why that is such a big decision to make. However, if you go down the first route where I am spending more money, I am putting myself into more risk. And the reason it's more risk is because I'm putting more money into the property, so more of my own capital, which is tied up. It's also increasing the amount of time that I've owning this property before selling it, before releasing my capital. But not only that, but I'm combining that with reducing the amount of the market that will potentially purchase my property. You see, if you take it all the way to the end line, you produce this lovely product, this lovely property which has been refurbished, you might find that this no longer works for investors. It's no longer a good buy-to-let property because they'll have to pay top market price for something which they can't now add value to. So now your target market really are homeowners and possibly some investors. However, the other option is to not go through the refurbishment process, but instead purchase the property and immediately advertise to sell it with no refurbishment, and just add on a margin so that I can walk away still, release my capital, but also have a profit margin. So clearly the benefits to this are the fact that I can get in and then exit out of the deal quicker. It means there's less capital and less risk required. But not only that, but also I keep the target audience open to a wider audience. It could be a homeowner, but now also it could be an investor that sees the potential to still add value, to maybe even apply the buy, refurbish, refinance model. So as I think you can tell from the way I've just described those two options, I went with option number two, no refurbishment, sell it quicker. And whilst I accepted obviously a lower price because of that, and therefore took a slightly lower profit margin, it allowed me the security and the lower risk to purchase this quickly, sell this quickly. And I'm now very grateful for that, because it means I can release that capital and hopefully take it towards a future purchase, as I mentioned earlier. Now, I think at this point in the video, and for transparency, it's really important to share the figures. Not only am I proud of this deal, but also I think it's beneficial if you can understand the purchase price and the sale price, and then perhaps the things that I did well, the things that I did wrong, which we'll come on to discuss. So I purchased this property for £65,000. The stamp duty was approximately £1,953. The solicitor's costs, or the legal costs, were £996. The holding costs for the property, which some people forget to include, which is things like council tax, gas, electricity, that came to £450. And then I went to sell this property on for £90,000. Now, you might have just done the maths and the quick calculations in your head there and thought, Justin, you made more than £15,000 profit. However, we have to factor in a few other things that I've missed there. I purchased this property cash using a private investor's funds, in which I paid him back those initial funds and an additional interest of £5,600. I also paid for the legal costs of selling this property, which came in at just over £1,000. So all in all, with everything was said and done, when I worked out my numbers on a spreadsheet, like you know I like to do, I came in at just over £15,000 in profit, and that was pre-tax. The timescale of this property was quite short. As a lot of you will know, the process for purchasing a property is often underestimated. You know, if we were doing the buy, refurbish, refinance model, which I shared with you at the beginning, you know, it might have taken us 3 to 4 months to purchase a property. It might have taken 3 months to refurbish it. Might have taken an additional 3 months to refinance it, if you're lucky. And therefore, the fluctuation of time is massive, and the whole process can be anything from 7 to 12 months. And your capital can be tied up for all that time. Now, when it comes to flipping, that's not much different, because we've got to purchase it, we've got to refurbish it, and then we've got to sell it. However, as I've already mentioned, I decided to cut out that middle part and not do the refurbishment. In fact, what I decided was to purchase this property, to sell it straight on to another investor, and leave enough profit margin in this for him for it to still be a good deal. You see, I sold it for £90,000, but I probably could have got £100,000. I possibly could have even got £105,000. However, for me, the speed in which the buyer could move was everything, and efficiency of the buyer was everything to me. I knew the economy was starting to change, or starting to show signals of change, and I knew that the other property I wanted to buy was starting to slip away. And therefore I needed to release this capital in order to go on and purchase it in time. And by doing that model of purchase and quick sale, it meant this whole process only took 5 months. That was 2 months to purchase it and just under 3 months to sell it. So in 5 months, I'd gone from not finding anything to then buying a house to then selling it, completing on it, and having made £15,000 profit. Now, with all these videos, I think it's important to share what went wrong and what went right. So when it comes to what did I do wrong, I think I just did one thing wrong here, and that was the way in which I purchased and sold this property. You see, when I originally agreed to buy this property, I had the intention of purchasing it, keeping it, you know, refurbishing it, refinancing it, keeping it and holding it for the long term. However, during that process, this all changed. If I had known the fact that this was going to change, I would have tried to acquire or tried to arrange this deal in a very different manner. In fact, I would have agreed a price with the owner and then taken this deal over to an investor and tried to get him to pay the higher price. Now, what I mean by this is agree with the owner, listen, I agree that we can get £65,000 for your property. Are you happy with that? Are you willing to sign a contract on that basis? I would then go out to the market to a buyer and say, look, you see this investment? Are you happy that that's worth £90,000, that you can still add value and that you could refinance at a higher price in the future? Okay, great. So you're happy to sell for 65, you're happy to sell for 90, I will take the cut in between. Now, the reason that this would have been better for me is it would have saved me 5 months. It maybe would have cut this process down to 2 to 3 months, because then it's a simple transaction between the seller and then the new buyer. Not only that, but I would have made more profit. I wouldn't have had to pay my private investor costs of 5,600 but I also wouldn't have had to pay for legal fees either end, and I wouldn't have had to pay for stamp duty, meaning that I could have taken a £15,000 profit and increased it probably to over £25,000 in profit. And I think that's where the expression comes from when they say that lessons are learned when mistakes are made. Without going through that process and then understanding that, I perhaps wouldn't have been open to doing that type of deal in the first place. And now I can take this newfound idea, newfound knowledge that I know other investors implement, and I can take that forward to another deal, another situation that I get into like this. Now, when it comes to what I did right in this deal, I do think I did many things right. First of all, being direct to vendor contact. By having direct contact with the owner, had full control, and I also had the exclusive opportunity to buy this property. So I'm not going out to the market and competing with lots of other buyers. I have exclusive opportunity to negotiate and agree a purchase direct with the owner. Not only that, but I think I secured a very good price. I spoke with the owner at length and we discussed the price and agreed to a price which he understood was slightly below where it should be. However, he understood the fact that this property needed lots of work doing to it. It needed to be upgraded, and that wasn't something that he had the time to do, nor the finances to go out and do. And therefore he was happy to let this property go at the price we agreed. And then finally, I went on to find a buyer and I left some profit margin in it for the new buyer. Now you might think, why on earth would you do that? Why would I sell it for £90,000 when I could get £100,000? And as I mentioned, this just comes back to the fact that I wanted a quick in and out of this deal. I wanted as low a risk as possible so that I could make some profit margin, could pay back my investor, and have the full experience of doing a transaction like this. So that's how I made £15,000 from just one property without even doing a refurb. So don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.